welcome back to another episode of the Dynamics Compass podcast, where we bring in the experts so you don't have to figure it all out the hard way. Today we're joined by Jesper. He is the founder and CEO of the Hoalani Group, an international Microsoft Dynamics partner with deep subject matter expertise in high-tech manufacturing, pharma, compliance consulting, and retail. They are known for their high-quality D365 implementations, yet are being approached more and more for rescue projects, which kicked off the discussion between Jesper and I. How come so many implementations need rescuing? What's going wrong? And what better person to ask than the one who's doing the rescuing? Um, Despite of what people think, Jesper and I are not from the same country. Jesper is Danish, I'm Dutch. It's not the same. But what is the same is how much we love the city of Barcelona and its food, and that we're both invested in companies getting their implementations right at the first try. So thank you so much for joining, Jesper. I'm excited to tackle these topics.
My pleasure.
All right. For the audience to get to know you a little bit, I always like to start with this question. What is something not a lot of people know about you?
Something that a lot of people know about me is that I do not have a degree in computer science or anything within the technology world. I actually started out as a rock musician with my own band, and I was, playing the clubs and all kinds of stuff in Denmark, especially around Copenhagen, and thought I was going to make a career in that field.
That's very random.
It didn't pay too well, so I went in and studied economics instead and wanted to become a stockbroker. But somebody in that world, friend of mine, he says, Jasper, get out of here because it's going to eat you up alive with the long days and everything. You need a real life. And, you know, uh, all these years later, I'm sucked up in the ERP world and CRM and Microsoft and technology and all that stuff. So,
And
yeah.
that's not eating up your whole life.
Nah, it is, but it's okay. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is very random. So from wannabe rock star to wannabe stockbroker to running your own Dynamics implementation company.
Yep.
That's really cool. All right, let's start off with the $1 million question that kicked off our discussion in the first place weeks ago.
hmm
Um, where do Microsoft Dynamics implementations most commonly go off the rails?
I think the simple answer is misalignment of expectations. But of course, that covers a multitude of things, right? So let me go into just a few of them. The first is the sales process. So the client is looking for a new enterprise system, ERP most predominantly, although it could also be CRM and other, but ERP is what we work with the most.
Hmm.
A lot of people outside of our world don't know the term ERP, so they just know two things. We need an enterprise system. We need something to handle our finance, our manufacturing, our compliance, whatever. And they want to know two things. What's it going to cost? And how long is it going to take? Right?
Yeah.
Then they get introduced to Microsoft, SAP, Oracle. The implementation partners start talking about the software, the services to implement. But the sales team typically miss out on a few very important things. One is that the client has maybe never done this before, or if it's
Mhm.
been so long that the people in the company have forgotten what it entails to actually put in an enterprise system. Even if they came from a small system that was put in at the beginning of the company's life cycle when the company started, they grew with it. They have no idea what it means to put in a new system with migration of data, completely different user experience, and all that stuff. And two, nobody likes change. And this is a huge change to everything that they know. And in the pursuit of the deal, nobody asks the tough questions. Are you ready for this? You realize that this is a huge disruption to your people. Do you have a change agent in the company, or should we provide one? Alignment is so critical to get these expectations settled between people, but it nearly always get missed in the pursuit of closing the deal on both sides, right? Because
Hmm.
the sales team, they want to close the deal and get started. The customer
Yeah.
want to close the deal and get started. So they often forget these things when they talk about the software and the implementation.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of malintent there?
I don't know so much that it's malintent. That would be too sinister, I think. I think it's mostly because that's what they're used to. And if you think back 40, 50 years, I mean, I got a lot of gray hair, right? I mean, I was born in the late 60s and I've been coming up with enterprise systems, and I've seen computers as they started to develop and all that stuff. So over the last 30, 40 years, I've also seen how we've sold ERP systems and implementations, and
Yeah.
it hasn't really changed much at all, right?
Yeah.
And when people break out from one company to start another company, often they do it the same way that they did it in the old company because that's what they were used to. So I don't think it's malintent or anything sinister like that. I think it's just because they're forgetting it or they're not thinking about it.
Yeah. Because the answers that you gave is either the companies they've never done this before, or the salesperson and the customer themselves they just want to close the deal and get started,
Mhm.
or just they're not comprehending the change. So it seems like everything's kind of leading towards that organizational change management in the end, or that's the part
Mhm.
that gets skipped or underestimated.
It often
Is
does.
is it why is it so often underestimated? Is that a lack of understanding of the importance, or is the customer being poorly advised?
I think it's a little bit of both, although poorly advised is a very loaded and sensitive term, right? Because that implies that the partner is not advising them properly.
Hmm.
I think it's mostly lack of understanding on both sides. A lot of implementation partners don't even understand what OCM is themselves. So the advice
Really?
is bordering sometimes on non-existent, right? Because imagine a consultant that knows so much about finance. They know so much about setting up chart of accounts, and project manager knows how to manage people. Often what they forget is that they're now sitting here with the system. Imagine F&O with the web interface and all that stuff, and you're not really allowed to click the back button because that can really get you in trouble, stuff like
Yeah.
that. And these people may have come from an old green screen system, or they may have come from some Windows-based system where they knew everything. SAP and the T codes and all that stuff. Now all of a sudden you present them with this user experience that is completely different, right? So I think that as for the companies underestimating the OCM, it's because very few people really understand the dynamics of change. I love reading, and I would like to recommend Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch: How to Change When Things When Change is Hard. That actually has fantastic insight into the psychology of change. And I'd say one thing more is that a lot of the most used quotes of all time is people hate change and nobody likes change.
Yeah.
What we should instead lead with is yes, change is not well liked, but we can teach people how to accept change and learn to like the outcome of it.
Yeah.
It's like, let me give you an example of many years ago. My wife had a Nokia 10 key phone. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
we're talking a lot of years ago, right?
Yeah.
20, 25 years ago. And I saw this Sony Ericsson with an MP3 player, and I'm like, oh, she's gonna love to hear music on the phone. So I went home and I said, hey, honey, you got a new phone now, this Sony Ericsson. I mean, the look in her eyes, if the looks could kill, I would
Yeah.
have been a dead man.
Because
So
he didn't want
later
to
on, we
change.
should, yeah. So later on, we should talk a little bit about what Jonathan Haidt called the rider and the elephant. But I'll leave you with that notion right now and move on for now.
Yeah. All right. You man, you kind of touched on it. When you and I had a conversation earlier, you gave an example where a Microsoft partner actually did quote the customer for organizational change management for like $200,000.
Mhm.
But the client didn't go for it. What should the partners be doing differently when it comes to scoping and justifying
I
OCM?
think, yeah, I think that quote for the 200,000 was a little bit ridiculous because you really don't know what OCM entails until you get into the organization and get a feel for who's change agent, who's not a change agent, all this stuff. So quoting 200,000 is a little bit strange.
Yeah.
But I'll get back to that. I mean, first, I think that partners should accept that they can't do everything. And if you have a problem with the electrical wiring in the house and your plumber says, I can fix that, would you let him? I mean, I wouldn't, right? Uh,
Hmm.
he's great with the sump pump and the sinks and everything else, right? And the toilets, but I would probably wouldn't let him fix the wiring, right? So in the same vein, the partners should accept that they don't know everything. And an OCM project itself should start with, if you truly know OCM, you really should start with going in and assessing the organization, which is a much smaller project, but you should let the customer know that it may yield a different kind of project later on, smaller or larger. We don't know that yet, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, it's they should look at it from that perspective instead, right? So, and on a final note, that partner that quoted the $200,000 OCM project was, by the way, a U.S. national CPA firm with a global reach and a technology practice, and even they really had no idea what they were getting themselves into because a CPA firm typically don't do OCM. And even the technology practice has no idea what they're doing there, right? So that's why we would never quote 200,000. We would do that assessment project first.
Okay. Is it the partners? Should the partners take the initiative with the OCM?
They should. They should. Now, they should also understand that they may not know about OCM themselves in effective ways, right? They may be pulling someone in like us and say, "Hey, we want to work with you." I mean, we work with Microsoft Consulting Services. We've worked together with Deloitte, Price Waterhouse, Ernst& Young, and others. So they know that they can contact us when this happens. Partners
Hmm.
should pull somebody in that really knows what they're doing. OCM is a very critical field, and they should lead with that. They should say, "Hey, listen, we know this is going to be a disruption. We know that people are going to be crying in the hallways during this implementation because they're frustrated. They hate change, and we know that we need change agents. We need somebody there that can facilitate that.
Yeah.
So they should lead. Absolutely, they should.
Sounds like this definitely has to be a criteria when customers are selecting a partner. Because what you said at the start already, there's many companies they either have never done an ERP implementation or it's been decades and the people that have done it back then are no longer with the business. So still no one has done it. So, and the customer doesn't know what they don't know. So they probably lead on the partner to know all the steps. But if the partner then isn't or doesn't have much capability with the organizational change management, then should that be a requirement apart from the implementation partner? Also look for a, a change partner, or should you just look for that change capability in your Microsoft implementation partner?
I would. I know we're going to be talking a little bit more about that later. But I would say that I would focus on I would focus on finding a partner that's doing what they're really good at. So, for example, you do not want to call me if you want to fix your backyard and make it pretty. You would want to call my wife instead, or somebody else. I can guarantee you that, right? So, I
Yeah.
think in the same sense, implementation partners often have a lot of good, strong technological experience and knowledge about the application.
Yeah.
Um, and even then, I've seen this actually happen with I work with a Bill Gates company out in Seattle in the past, and they actually contracted a program management firm in to only do that. It was actually quite brilliant.
Okay.
So in the same vein, I think that we need to look at what can the implementation partner do. Yeah, they got a lot of consultants that are really good. They got technical architects, they got testers, they got developers, all that stuff. Use them for that purpose. They know what they're doing. Okay. In the
Yeah.
same vein, I think that we need to look at, okay, who can now do our advisory and checks and balances and OCM and all that stuff? Well, that's where we come in. That's where we go like, well, we can help you with the organizational change management. We can help you with the program or project management. We actually have really strong people in data migration, something implementation partners often also, they know sort of how to do it, but it's not a specialty. In fact,
Yeah.
I've worked with implementation partners in the past that says, and I got a great example of that one. It's actually Microsoft Consulting Services that scoped out for a client a $40,000 data migration piece out of a $5 million project.
Yeah.
And the customer believed, because Microsoft Consulting Services are the experts, so the customer believed that they would get all their data migrated for those 40,000. And I had to advise them and say, listen, hang on, 40,000 will do the assessment of your data and what you need and give you some tools. It's not going to migrate the entire data set. In fact,
Yeah.
it cost them over $1.5 million before they were done with the data migration.
Oh, wow.
So you should look at other partners. You should look at a program management specialist. Just like you probably called in, if you're a large company, you called in a company to help you with the software selection. For
Hmm.
example, if you wrote an RFP,
Yep.
in the same vein, you should figure out, okay, who can do good program management? Who can do good organizational change management? Is this partner really good with data migration? Is this partner good with this and that? We have partners in the channel. We actually have a specialty unit that does this as well, that does reporting, output management, input management. A lot of partners actually, I've worked for one in the past where the rule of thumb was that we scoped out the projects, but we always told the client we don't do the reports. We just don't, because reports can be a sinkhole if you're not careful, right? Because
Yeah.
everybody prettied up here and there and everywhere, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, you should get different partners that know what they're doing. Just like you get the electrician, the plumber, etc. But you may have a general contractor to build your house, but they pull in all the specialists.
Yeah. I think that's a great takeaway. Just that last sentence right there. Because like myself, for example, I love going for an all-in-one solution. Like just go to one. I want one. It's not a great expression. One throat to choke.
Yeah,
It's not the best expression. I don't know who came up with that,
I know. I've heard it
but
before too.
it's very convenient. Oh, I only have to deal with one entity to sort all my entire project. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's better to split it up in expertise areas and get the
Yep.
best in each area. That makes a lot of sense. All right. I'll shift the conversation a little bit. Still talk about why implementations are going wrong or what is needed to make them go successfully.
Mhm.
Um, Regarding leadership, how much does the identity and influence of the project sponsor impact the outcome of an implementation?
It can have quite a significant impact, almost bordering on a huge impact. It can make or break an implementation. We have a client who had a COO, now retired,
Yeah.
and he was able to always ask the right questions that would put people into solution mode, right? He would say, "Oh, have you thought about this? And what about this? And can we do something different over here? And let's sit at a table and and start brainstorming about how we can do things differently," right?
Yeah.
Whereas I've also seen project sponsors that the first thing they do is start to figure out who's at fault.
Mm.
But often it's not as simple as who's to blame, because it's dynamics between people, and that project sponsor that really knows what they're doing, they can really make or break a project. They can be the difference between a project that runs smoothly, where people are speaking with each other and communicating, collaborating, versus one where they're doing trench wars and just fighting each other.
Okay. So it's not necessarily the role that they have in the company, it's the influence that they have within the company.
Oh yeah, I've seen some. In fact, I hired a lady some years ago. She's no longer with me. She moved on to a great position in a different company. Um, She had no background, no nothing within project management, but I hired her as a project manager while she was, I think, like 3 or 4 months pregnant. But I saw something in her,
Yeah.
and she took one of our projects, went in there and started to get people to collaborate, communicate, and speak together, and all that stuff. And she was what I would consider at the time a junior program manager or project manager, but she had it. She really had it. Same
Yeah.
vein I've seen in one of our clients, they have a business transformation director who reports into the VP, who then reports into the president and so forth. And he is phenomenal at that work. So it's not necessarily about, oh, it's got to be a C-suite person or anything like that.
Yeah.
You got to look for the person with the right skill set.
Okay. You're the maybe I'm not speaking to enough people, but you're the first person that actually says this. Most often the discussion is, should it be the CIO? Should it be the CFO? Um, I like this. There's a lot in this answer that it's not that black and white. Is what I'm
Right.
trying to say.
But there's one thing though, is that if you choose somebody who's not a CIO or CFO or whatever, then it's got to be clear to everybody that let's say that the CFO points out a person or the CIO points out a person that's a little bit low on the ranks. It's got to be crystal clear to everybody on the project that that I have that person's back, and whatever that person says, you got to consider it as if it came from me. That's
Yeah.
gotta that authority has to be there. Otherwise, they're gonna look at it as if it was that junior person and say, "Oh, you don't really have the clout." So that's got to be crystal clear if you choose somebody that's not in the C-suite.
Okay. That's really good to know. Other pillar. Um, Companies or customers that say or have the approach, I want to make sure I'm in good hands, so I'll go with a big known firm to do my implementation. What do you think of that approach?
Yeah, it's like that old saying from the 80s or whenever it originated, right? Nobody ever got fired for buying blue. Like buying IBM would be the safe bet
Yeah,
back then when you needed computers.
yeah,
And while that may still be true to some degree, it's also a sign of playing safe bets rather than looking at the investment and be a good steward of the company's money. We have a client that pulled in a large accounting/consulting firm. I think Big Four or at least right below that, in addition to a Salesforce implementation firm and a D365 technical consulting firm that both ran pure agile,
yeah.
but which definitely can be a sinkhole in its own right if not managed properly. And before they knew what was going on, they were spending $2 million per month with nothing to show for it.
2 million.
Um, 2 million, yeah. I'm not gonna mention the company because it's not the company's fault. It's just the way that it was mismanaged, right? We didn't want to squeeze out the others, but the spend was ridiculous. Right? So we got in there and we called a moratorium, and the VP of Finance chose to then kick out the others completely. Um, we brought in somebody else to assist with the implementation also. They had been trying to implement D365 F&O since 2017, so it took them roughly 6 years and close to, oh, I don't know how many millions of dollars. I don't even want to think about it. Right? 6 months later, we took them live to the tune of less than 1 million total, or around 1 million total, or less than 5% of their previous annual budget.
And they've been in
Uh,
flight for 6 years, did you say?
they had been in flight for six
Wow.
years at the time. But there was a lot of dynamics also inside the company
I
that,
bet.
that caused a lot of things, right? But yeah, so as a Microsoft sales director, actually, that I know, an old friend of mine told me a few years ago, Jesper, people buy from MCS, Microsoft Consulting Services, Accenture, Avanade, Pricewaterhouse, Ernst& Young, because they want an insurance policy. They're blinded by the name, and they believe that they should be big enough to handle everything. But if they don't, here comes the interesting part. At least they have somebody to sue and blame when things go wrong. A company with deep pockets. I think it's crazy. Honestly, I think that you should be a good steward with the company's money instead and choose a quality firm. And like I said, maybe multiple different firms that are specializing in what they need to specialize in.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like the choosing of the partner should be reevaluated, or the approach for choosing a partner should be reevaluated in that
Hmm.
case. Okay.
Yes.
All
And
right.
I see it again and again and again.
Yeah. And I know that could be a whole episode in itself, just talking about how to select a partner. So we won't go into that rabbit
Right.
hole. Um, Scope creep is also it's a silent killer in many projects. How
Mhm.
should partners handle evolving requirements without turning into a yes man or blowing the budget?
Yeah, so scope creep is definitely problematic, but I also think it can be avoided. Maybe not completely. There's always going to be something, right? I mean, the world is not perfect, but let's talk about the scope and the requirements first. Because are we doing things because they are the most efficient, or are we doing them because that's just the way it's always been done in the company,
Hmm.
right? So when we define the requirements, there is also this they start asking people, okay, what do you need? Right? And you know the old high level requirements that you then flesh out. Then that gets turned over into somebody else that then fleshes out that. And there's a lot of uh, not necessarily misunderstanding, but the people that then interviewed it, they put down in a document, and then somebody else reads the document and say, oh, I think this is what they meant. But
Hmm.
now you're like two or three layers down. So now you can imagine that whatever that person that you originally interviewed and asked them what do you need in your production line? Now it gets communicated to somebody that writes it down that may have misunderstood a thing or two or doesn't write it properly.
Yeah.
Um, and then hand it over to an architect that says, "Oh, I think I know what this means." So again, they forget to ask the questions, and then they turn it over to maybe a developer or a consultant to implement it. And now you got the disconnect, right? You got too many links in that chain
Yeah.
going on, right? Partners, they can handle it effectively by creating better alignment with a client. And actually, maybe this is where modern technology comes in easy recordings and videos and going back and say, oh, let me look at the recording of what that interview said about that person, or let me actually go back to that person.
Hmm.
David Marquette, actually the author of Intent-Based Leadership, actually said it very brilliantly at one point. Put the authority where the information is, and if you take that back, you actually and think about it, then you actually go back to that person that has the information that says, you are the authority. What do you think about this? Did I understand this correctly? But often I think that step is forgotten. Then I believe you should define an MVP, like minimum viable product,
Hmm.
instead of trying to scope everything out in front. Waterfall works brilliantly if you want to build a bridge over a river, but I don't think it works great for enterprise systems because you're dealing with people changing business requirements, all this stuff. So build a minimum viable product and then add on from there. It also gives you a faster path to success and implementation. Two, you need to implement a must-go prioritization. Must have, should have, could have, and won't have
Yeah.
in order to figure out is this really necessary. I We have a client that years ago let the users in the company basically more or less get their will all the time, like the kid in the candy store.
Yeah.
And at one point, I may be exaggerating a little bit here, but at one point, one person wanted the sales order screen to be in yellow colors. The next minute, it was in red colors, and it was a complete mess, right?
Yeah.
So you gotta really do that Moscow prioritization and say, is this necessary? Is this something we must have, or do we need to push it off? And then, of course, back to the OCM. Make sure it's defined because the successful implementation of Moscow prioritization requires a strong sponsor and a strong change agent. And the very definition of Moscow is actually to say no, or maybe later, and sometimes yes. But nobody wants to hear a no, right? Nobody wants to be told you can't have that. So
Hmm.
unless you have that strong change management agent, you will get resistance. And resistance can put the project on a path to possible failure.
Okay. There's a lot there as well.
That's a lot to
Um,
unpack. Yes.
yes, yeah, yeah. So just trying to process that. Um, yeah, you're with minimum viable product. You're not
Mhm.
saying stick to out of the box. That's not what you're saying.
That's not what I'm saying. No.
Okay.
I think a lot of people mistake the two for each other. But if you take what's out of the box and you say, okay, here I have a company and that I have to come hell or high water adapt that company to what's out of the box, you could break some processes in the company that um, would then actually almost directly impact profitability in the company, right?
Hmm.
We have a client that they are so good with great customer service. So if a customer in, say, Denmark or the Netherlands orders a product from them, they get it maybe manufactured in the US, shipped to their facility in Sweden or Germany, and then delivered to, say, the Netherlands, for example. Now, if something goes wrong, they need to send it in for repair. They actually then take that product and ship that back to Germany, where the last point of entry was.
Yeah.
They decide what to do with it, maybe send it all the way back to the US. And because they're like, well, we can't have the customer in the Netherlands send the stuff to the US. That would not be reasonable. They're dealing with Germany. So, which is fair, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you take standard out of the box, it doesn't support that in F&O really. So if you say to the customer, hey, you're going to have to change your business process, you are directly affecting the customer service quality that they're delivering, which could impact the bottom line in a very significant way. So yes, minimum viable product is definitely not the same as out of the box.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. So Jesper, you've given a lot of answers already, a lot of topics you touched on with what's very important to make sure your ERP implementation doesn't fail. It does sound like a lot has to do with organizational change management, but there's also other factors, and each of these factors could be a whole episode in itself.
Mhm.
Um, I guess I'll just have to recommend whoever's watching this and has any questions on whatever you said to go and contact you. Like you'll be tagged in every video wherever I post this video, you'll be tagged so people can find you and maybe they should just reach out to you for more details. Um,
And I'm the person that I will always have at least half an hour for people to answer questions.
I can
That's
attest to
something
that.
I learned a long time ago.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's I'm very grateful for that as well.
Mhm.
But the last question then, and I don't know if this is an easy one, probably not. If you had to give one piece of advice to a company starting a Dynamics implementation tomorrow, what would it be to avoid ending up on the failed project list?
It's difficult to say only one thing, but I would say I have a lot of thoughts about how they can end up on the successful side of things, right? I have a lot of thoughts about that,
Hmm.
including how to look at IT as a strategic thing and how to look at all kinds of stuff that way, right? How to look at it from a business perspective rather than a technology perspective and all kinds of stuff. But if I had to give one piece of advice, I would say do not be afraid to have multiple partners with each of their responsibilities clearly defined. Like we mentioned in the past, if you are building a house, you have a general contractor, but you need plumbers to put the piping in, you need electricians to put the wiring in, and so forth and so on, right? We have done successful implementations together with others where we did the OCM, did the data migration, etc. But they let the requirements gathering and the implementation, the development. And then we have to look at the central project or program management. Preferably, that should not be from the implementation partner either, because that's like having the sheep or the wolf watch the sheep.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to bring in others. Like I mentioned in the past, I work with one of Bill Gates' other portfolio companies up in Seattle some years ago, and they brought in a program management company to manage the whole thing. Then they brought in an implementation partner to take care of the technology. And they started bringing in others that were specialists in other things. It was actually a quite brilliant concept. And that's the place, I think, this happened all the way back in 2003. That's where I learned that an implementation partner does not necessarily have to be a one-stop shop. That's where I learned that, oh, these guys over here, I can close my eyes and see the program manager in front of me, brilliant guy that knew exactly what he was doing, kept everything in check. So that's where I learned that you can have multiple partners in there. The only thing you cannot have is shared responsibility on the project management, program management front. We have seen that fail on a large implementation worldwide, actually, company headquartered in Germany, later on got acquired by a large US company with 3,000 employees. And they brought in two partners. The first partner they got in was the implementation partner. They also gave them project management responsibilities.
Hmm.
Then they brought in another Microsoft partner to do the project management. That was a mess. It was a meltdown.
I imagine.
Finally, they brought us in to only do program management and organizational change management, and we got them turned around. But that's why I say do not have multiple partners in there with shared responsibilities.
Yeah,
But
each looks after their own silo, basically.
yes, yes. So do not be afraid to contract multiple different partners in. It's not necessarily going to be more expensive because whether you have program management from this partner or that partner largely equates to the same cost in the end, or same investment, I should say, because it is an investment in your future of the company.
Yeah.
So having it in two separate companies is not necessarily a bad thing. And if you have that project sponsor and that program management partner that understands to get people to collaborate and speak together, you can have a super successful project by taking that approach and having multiple partners in there.
Yeah. It sounds
It
like it.
can
Sorry?
it can work really well. That's all I wanted to say.
I was going to say it's probably very helpful to have someone guide you through the process of selecting the partners, identifying the gaps, and then filling other partners to find them. Rather, it sounds quite complex. If you're a customer who's not done an ERP implementation in a long time, and you now need to go out and select 3 to 5 partners,
Mhm.
I think it might be a bit overwhelming by the sounds of it.
Yeah, and that is also where, I mean, we are also in the lucky position that we were actually asked at one point by a company and say, guys, you're not our implementation partner. And I'm like, okay, but can you help us find the proper implementation partner? Can you help us find this? I'm like, sure, no skin off my back. If you tell me up front that I'm not gonna uh, be your girlfriend, that's fine. Can I help you find another girlfriend? Sure, not a problem.
Okay,
No,
Th that ended up well.
maybe I'm different from most people that way.
Yeah,
And it did end well. Yeah.
no, that's really good. That speaks to your character as well, that you're still willing to help. Because yeah, some people I could see some people turn sour when they feel rejected. Like, no, I'm now gonna set you up with someone who's not a good fit for you.
Well,
Obviously, you don't
remember,
want to ruin your reputation.
right, but remember rejection, you can also be looked at from a different perspective, right? I have a lot of I guess you would call Buddhist thinking in my body, right? A rejection can also be seen as an opportunity to go spend your energy on something else. There's opportunity in everything.
Yeah,
It's not necessarily a negative thing.
yeah, no, I like that. Um, thanks so much for being on today and sharing all these insights. Again, we could have dived a lot deeper into a lot of things that you were saying, but if anyone has any questions, find Jesper online, reach out to him. He'll make time to speak to you. I found this very useful. I learned a lot here as well, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot more by staying in touch with you. So thanks again for coming on today, Jesper.
Absolutely my pleasure.
All right, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode on the Dynamics Compass podcast. We decided to launch this podcast after having spoken to a lot of people in the community who seem to be looking for answers to the same questions. So then we decided, why don't we find experts in the market that have the answers, interview them, and then release that information for free to help everyone progress their Microsoft Dynamics journey. So we hope that you found this video very informative and helpful for you to continue your journey and keep moving forward. If you would like to hear about any other topics, please write to me on LinkedIn, email me, rory@thegoodtalent.co, and we'd be happy to have a look. We'll look for the experts that have the answers. We'll interview them, and it will be freely available to you. Again, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for your support as well, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.